An individual identified as a Moor made an interesting assertion related to the construct of reparations and the idea of those who understand themselves as Jacob articulating that they've been wronged and that they are entitled to reparations because, according to the individual, those who are identifying as Jacob also have a tendency to see themselves under this Deuteronomy 28 curse. And so, therefore, what they are articulating and what the individual was affirming was that the individuals are not due reparations because, according to the narrative, everything that is happening to them is a part of a deserved curse. So we're going to unpack this very quickly. We've talked about this dynamic of oppression, obsession before, and this oppression, obsession actually serves as a case against reparations. Individuals have to decide what it is that they actually believe about what has taken place, but it's very difficult for individuals to do that if they don't actually read what it is and deconstruct what it is that they are making these claims based upon. And so there is this focus on Deuteronomy 28. We're going to look at why Deuteronomy 28 does not directly apply to those individuals who are in the United States or those who understand themselves as being of Jacob. And before we get into this, where we are going is this dynamic of narcissism and projecting psychopathy. And so it's very easy to manipulate people when they are operating in a very narcissistic framework because they are prone to be manipulated. Many people talk about being afraid of narcissists, but narcissists actually are very vulnerable. And so when individuals are operating from a narcissistic standpoint, it's sometimes very difficult to see that they are actually being manipulated. And so we're looking at Deuteronomy 28, and Deuteronomy 28 is a covenant, a compact, an agreement. If you look at Strong's, you will see the specifics of what is going on in Deuteronomy 28. And so in Deuteronomy 28, you have actual specific offerees, those individuals who are accepting the offer. And then you have the entity known as the creator in Deuteronomy 28 being the offerer. And so the creator in the narrative is offering something in exchange for something else. But you have a specific offerer and you have specific offerees. And so at that time, individuals are free to accept or not accept whatever is being offered. And so many individuals take this to mean that all of this applies to all of these descendants, and they will find things inside of Deuteronomy to justify this. However, if you just go back a couple of chapters in Deuteronomy, for exact, you will see that that's not the case, and it's not even a possibility, and it precedes Deuteronomy 28. We're going to look at that. And so what individuals are staking these oppression claims on is this sort of incidental detriment dynamic. And so when there are parties to a contract, to a covenant, to an agreement, you have an actual beneficiary. And in this instance, the beneficiary is the individual accepting the covenant. And those people are very well spelled out. The tribes are listed. The people actually did the yay or nay to indicate whether they were agreeing. But what individuals are doing is they are assuming that this automatically applies to every single descendant on down the line into perpetuity. But what you are seeing is a process, a dynamic of having potential incidental beneficiaries and individuals who are incidentally living in detriment. But they are not the parties to the contract. They are not the parties to the covenant. And so when you look at what an incidental beneficiary is, it's a person, it's a third party. They are not a party to the actual contract. And that individual is going to benefit from the contract, but they are not the intended person. They are not intended to benefit because it's really a contract between these specific entities. And when you look at Deuteronomy 28, that's what you see. You see basically a standard contract. And so individuals, however, who understand themselves, believe themselves as being descended from these people, take all of the things that are happening to them as manifestations of living out these curses in Deuteronomy that were not, according to the narrative, placed on them. If you actually deconstruct the entire narrative. And of course, we already had a discussion about this idea of someone being responsible for the sins of others. And so when you look at Deuteronomy 24, that comes before Deuteronomy 28, you see this admonition yet again, and it comes before the admonition that we talked about before. And so it indicates the fathers shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. In other words, sin and salvation are individual dynamics. And so each person is responsible for all of their choices, and no one else is suffering the consequences of someone else's exercise of freedom. And so individuals may offer explanations regarding how people actually suffer from the wrongs of others. But we're not talking about specifically in the natural world. We are also talking about here this narrative about the spiritual world. And so this is about spirituality. This is about morality. And so that's what it's talking about. It's not talking about necessarily economic repercussions. It's not talking about other social repercussions. It's talking about sin and then this penalty for sin. And what it's indicating is this whole dynamic is individual. It's not something that you inherit. You don't inherit the sins of your father. Just think about it. Can you imagine if you actually inherited all of the wrongs that your parents do, or that you would even be responsible for every single thing that your mother has done or that your father has done? Parents make it very clear to children, as a matter of fact, that they are not the same when they separate from them, and then they launch them and they say, hey, you're on your own. You are responsible for who? You. And so this is a mirror of what's supposed to be going on in the scripture narrative. You are ultimately responsible for your individual choices on a spiritual level, and in many ways on a just very practical, real level. And so the idea is not that you should be responsible for the wrongdoings of others, or that someone else should be responsible for your wrongdoings. This includes your children and their spiritual lives. And this goes back to that whole idea of deserving the mistreatment. We talked about psychopathy with respect to the dynamics that have taken place in the past, specifically with slavery. And so you can see with the transatlantic slave trade, where all of these actors had to be operating under a psychopathic paradigm to even pull it off. But what you have is a collective of individuals, primarily in the United States, identifying themselves as African Americans, identifying themselves as descendants of Jacob, absolving those who are behaving in a psychopathic manner of any wrongdoing. And instead, they relabel this wrongdoing as deserved curses that go into perpetuity for that select, special, chosen group. This is where narcissism comes in. Because if someone is just so focused on being special and so focused on being chosen, that narcissism, that type of narcissism, makes them vulnerable to all sorts of dynamics. And so in many ways, the individuals are willing to relabel, accept all of these so-called curses because they are determined to be that special chosen group of people who deserve these chosen curses, when in fact they were not party to the original covenant in Deuteronomy 28. And so what's also noteworthy is that these curses, they only seem to apply to those who are identified as African Americans in the United States, who are identifying themselves as these descendants of Jacob. You do not hear Jamaicans identifying themselves as deserving of any curses. These curses apparently don't apply to Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cubans, those in Guatemala, Costa Rica, Bermuda, those in Ireland, Scotland, England, Spain, France, Portugal, Saudi Arabia, that country known as Israel, Palestine, Zimbabwe, Sudan, Morocco, Turkey, Russia, Philippines, China, India, Cambodia, Japan, Italy, the Baltics, Sweden, the Indian Ocean Islands, the Netherlands, Pakistan, United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Chad, Mali, just these discrete people in the United States known as African Americans. And then the justification is another form of narcissism. The justification for all of this being heaped on this one particular group is that the world is afraid of them because they are Judah. And so therefore all of these things are happening only to Judah. There's nothing in the scripture to suggest that all of these curses of the world are supposed to be heaped on this group that is identifying itself as Judah. It just doesn't exist. But what is happening is people are willing, just for the sake of going by this name, to take all of this abuse, to take this singling out, to take this pathologizing dynamic onto themselves, just to have that special identity. And they go even further by projecting the psychopathic actions of others onto what they are understanding as or referring to as their creator. And so therefore, again, these individuals are absolved. They don't really have to deal with the real situation. And because there is an obsession with oppression, this singling out, this abuse is received as and excused as deserved. I'm going to tell you something else about this, because this is what was being communicated by the individual who identified as a Moor. What they were essentially saying was that these individuals, known as African Americans, Black Americans in the United States, are sending the message to the rest of the world that they co-sign on the psychopathy, that they are serving as their own flying monkeys in the repetitive targeting and destruction. And you might want to look up what a flying monkey is in the context of a psychopath or a pathological narcissist. And so I'm going to wrap this up with one question, and it is referring to Hosea 4:6. And the question is, why exactly do the people perish?